In this episode, we travel not to a backyard cemetery, nor a prison, nor even a courtroom, but to a place where the truth yields only to federal budget cuts, a place where science promises answers and where superstition is expected to die quietly beneath the hum of fluorescent lighting. But even in a crime laboratory, there are some mysteries that do not dissolve beneath microscopes or within test tubes. And in our story today, the deceased show us that they strongly object to being examined. Because of the national media attention Thomas Martin's case garnered, the 42 coffins stored at the county coroner's office in Ashwick demanded transport to the FBI facility in Quantico, Virginia. There, they would rest peacefully inside a locked-down, heavily guarded forensic storage facility. The coffins were laid out in 6 perfect rows, 42 polished caskets arranged with the discipline of soldiers awaiting their inspection by a drill sergeant. To the federal government, the caskets were evidence. To Thomas Martin, they were records. And to Special Agent Peter Hayward, they were terror. Hayward was among the FBI's finest forensic investigators, precise, methodical, and revered for his ability to reconstruct truth from fragments of evidence invisible to ordinary men. However, unbeknownst to his supervisors, Peter Hayward suffered from a rare but powerful psychological affliction, necrophobia, defined as an overwhelming and irrational fear of the dead, not of death itself, but of the dead. Coffins unsettled him. Funeral homes caused him panic attacks. Open caskets made his throat tighten and his heart race. Absent an ability to refuse a direct order, Hayward had to carry out every duty to which he was assigned. In this case, what he feared most, the duty of opening caskets to determine what was inside, all 42 of them. All day Friday, Hayward worked alone inside the storage facility, cataloging brass manufacturer plates attached to each casket. Batesville caskets. He read aloud repeatedly, Batesville, Batesville, Indiana. He photographed serial numbers on the caskets with trembling fingers while trying not to imagine what might rest inside them. When 5 o'clock hit, his nerves were frayed into threads. Hayward gathered his files, shut off the overhead examination lamps, and practically fled the building. He told himself that Monday would be different. Monday always seems safer when leaving for the weekend. At 7 p.m., 2 night custodians arrived to clean the storage facility, Edward Doty and John Lester, known respectively as Eddie and JJ. They were 2 men whose relationship to work and responsibility was distant and largely theoretical. They were the sort of custodians who considered mopping floors an inconvenience, interrupting their on-the-job drinking binges. Before they clocked in, each had already consumed a couple of marijuana gummies in the parking lot. This made the workplace appear delightfully pleasant for them. When he walked in, Eddie pointed toward the rows of caskets and burst into laughter. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Looks like Arlington National Cemetery had itself a clearance sale." JJ squinted at the coffins. "Guess we'll have to clean up after these fellers." Then he added solemnly, "Just hope they ain't unionized." The 2 men laughed so hard, Eddie spilt the water in his mop bucket on the floor. Inside the back maintenance closet, there was a refrigerator they stocked with beer for Friday evenings such as this. With 42 coffins in their way, to them, that night appeared like it might present a bit of a challenge. A 6-pack later for each of them, with the combined effect of the gummies they ate, the FBI crime lab resembled less a federal institution and more a frat house inhabited by rowdy undergrads. Eddie connected his cell phone to the room's Wi-Fi speakers, and thereafter the building thundered with voices of Eddie's playlist: Ozzy Osbourne, Alice Cooper, Marilyn Manson, 9 Inch Nails, and Metallica. Needless to say, the coffins were completely oblivious to the heavy metal extravaganza. JJ leaned against a storage rack. "I wonder what's actually inside these here coffins." Eddie answered immediately, "I don't know, and I really don't give a rat's ass." Then JJ's eyes brightened with catastrophic inspiration. "For giggles, let's open one up." Eddie considered this carefully, which for him meant a split second. Well, okay, he shrugged. They cracked open the first coffin as if they were opening a flip-top on a beer can. Inside the first coffin rested 3 neatly arranged objects: a cell phone, a photograph, and a gift-wrapped box of Godiva chocolates. And now it's time for us to take a brief respite to listen to an intermezzo conceived by world-renowned composer E. Dude X, after which the saga of Thomas Martin will resume. We continue. Eddie blinked. JJ spurted out, "What the F is that?" Eddie picked up the photograph. It showed a young boy standing beside a gray-haired man. By now, every person who followed the national news had heard of Thomas Martin, the death whisperer. Yet in the condition they were in, neither Eddie nor JJ were able to put 2 and 2 together. They had no idea that the photograph they were looking at was a picture of Thomas Martin as a child. "The kid looks creepy," Eddie observed. "Maybe the kid's gay or a tranny, and the old guy is some weirdo pedophile," JJ quipped. They opened a second coffin. Same contents as the first. Another. Same again. The only difference between the contents of each coffin was that the person standing in the photo next to the young boy was a different one. By the 20th casket, the novelty of opening coffins had begun to fade. JJ sighed dramatically. "This is getting too damn boring for me." Then his bloodshot eyes settled upon the chocolates. The munchies had arrived with biblical authority. "Well," he announced, "if the dead ain't eating them." He tore open a box of chocolates and devoured them with astonishing speed. Eddie followed suit. Within minutes, the contents of 2 full boxes had disappeared, with wrappers scattered across the floor everywhere. "Fancy candy," Eddie slurred. "The government probably paid $100 a box." JJ licked melted chocolate from his thumbs. "Worth every taxpayer dollar." Then Eddie stopped speaking. He swayed slightly at first and then began to stagger. Within seconds, he collapsed face first onto the concrete floor. JJ stared at him. "Eddie, are you okay?" No response. "Come on, man, quit fooling around." Then JJ himself began feeling dizzy. The room tilted sideways. JJ's vision narrowed, and within seconds he joined Eddie on the cold and hard concrete floor. Suddenly, the 42 coffins no longer appeared stationary. They seemed closer. The open caskets now resembled waiting mouths. The overhead music distorted grotesquely. Then a train whistle sounded, low, distant, approaching. Then the cell phones inside each coffin lit simultaneously. Their glowing screens spoke in unison with a text message that read, "Trespassers." Monday morning arrived cold and gray. Peter Hayward reluctantly returned to Quantico with a large coffee in hand he picked up at the local 7-Eleven and a bottle filled with anti-anxiety medication he brought from home in his coat pocket. The moment he opened the storage facility door, the smell hit him. Rotting flesh. Death. His knees buckled. Half the coffin stood open. Beer cans and candy wrappers littered the floor. And beside the caskets on the floor lay Eddie Doty and J.J. Lester, stone cold dead. Hayward's panic attack began instantly. His breath shortened. Sweat began to bead up on his forehead. Yet somehow his years of training prevailed over his terror. He radioed FBI security, and within minutes the building became a federal crime scene. The bodies were removed, photographs taken, evidence cataloged, and 24 hours later, toxicology reports delivered the impossible conclusion. The two men had died of cyanide poisoning. Hayward stared silently at the reports while his hands trembled. He knew that neither custodian had access to cyanide and that the only items found near the bodies were chocolate wrappers and empty beer cans. The remaining boxes of chocolates were opened and the candies were tested for traces of toxins. By mid-morning, investigators found their culprit. It was the candies. Each individually wrapped candy was laced with cyanide. Back in Ashwick, Detective Miller received the FBI report from Quantico just after sunset. He read it twice, then a third time. His office at the police station suddenly felt colder. This recent development introduced a question no rational investigator wished to entertain, not even him. Could the dead have attempted to commit murder? Not metaphorically, not spiritually, but literally. The dead had sent text messages. They had moved objects across time and distance. They had constructed railways visible to the living. And now, two intoxicated custodians lay dead from cyanide poisoning after violating the privacy of some 20 coffins. The same toxin that Thomas Martin used to poison his parents and his 3 siblings that past Thanksgiving. Meanwhile, inside his prison cell miles away, Thomas Martin sat quietly in his cell on a musty-smelling cot. George Stevens, his around-the-clock prison guard, stood sentry outside Martin's cell. Stevens' cell phone began to vibrate softly in his coat pocket. One new message appeared. Same unknown, untraceable phone number as the message he received when Martin first arrived. The message read, "They should not have opened the chocolates. They were for Thomas." Then another message arrived. Cyanide. Then another. The dead value their privacy. And yet another. The train is still running behind schedule. Further down the prison corridor, one could hear the distant sound of steel wheels moving ever so slowly along a set of tracks no architect had ever designed. 42 coffins, 2 dead custodians, 1 federal investigation, and a troubling possibility that the deceased are no longer content remaining silent participants in human grief. They were initiating it by committing murder themselves, and the murder of custodians Doty and Lester were likely intended for Thomas Martin. Somewhere between evidence and eternity, between forensic science and forbidden trespass, there may exist laws older and harsher than those written by man, laws enforced not by courts, but by generations of the deceased who, once upon a time, paid a visit to the Conflation Station.